Ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sandeep. I'm the Director of Solutions at Neudesic, and today I'm going to walk you through some of the new enhancements that are forthcoming in the version of Team Foundation Server, codenamed 11 for now. And we're going to take a look at how this particular version is intended to drive agility in your enterprise, right? So before we get started, I definitely like to keep my sessions interactive. So please feel free to raise your hands in between and stop me and ask any questions if you have. Or if you'd like, in the interest of the larger audience, you could park your questions for later, and then we'll have a Q&A session in the end, and where you can ask more questions if there is a need. Okay, so let's get started. How many of you, I'm just trying to get some audience profile here. So how many of you are practicing Agile in some form today? Oh, close to about 80% of the teams here. Pretty nice. Interesting perspectives. I travel and talk to different teams, and I get different perspectives of Agile. A lot of people think they're doing it right inherently when they are not. Some interesting inputs that I get is, I like Agile because it says there is no documentation. Some other people who would actually be doing Agile in some form or the other, they don't even realize that they're doing it, right? Personally, I believe it's more of a mindset than a process or a methodology. It's a group of people with set ideologies, those who have come together and with one particular goal in mind to make their goals successful, right? They want to be successful in their enterprise. So Agile is just not one thing. There are a lot of people with different ideologies who would like to give a particular name to their ideology so that they can understand what they are doing and evangelize it in turn. So if you look at this, there are different practices within Agile itself. Some are very prescriptive in nature, meaning that, for example, rational unified. Anybody doing rational today? Oh, nobody. That's kind of a good thing. It says that, there is a list of 25 things, and you have to check each one of them in order for you to tell that you're aligned to a rational unified process. A very tight walk that you have to do in order to be able to get aligned to the rational process. Some people do whatever they like. In my mind, that's Agile as well. You're working towards something that's making you successful, and if you are able to do that in a very repetitive fashion and you're able to be successful with that particular practice that you've implemented, I think that's good as well. If you notice on this side, on the extreme right-hand side of the graph, there are some processes which are more lean, like, for example, Kanban. Anybody doing Kanban today? No? Okay. So it's a very empirical process. It kind of says that you limit your work in progress to a particular number, work towards that number, empirical, fine-tune it over a period of time, and then get to a number that works for you as a process, right? A lot of attention is driven towards Scrum. How many of you are doing Scrum? Oh, all of you. Cool. So that's interesting about Scrum. It's gaining a lot of popularity, primarily because of one fact is that it's not very watertight. It allows for a lot of flexibility within itself. That has been acknowledged by Microsoft, and they are also trying to drive Agile Scrum as a process guidance with the different tools that they're coming up with, right? And we're going to take a look at this in future. All right. One thing Agile Scrum says, and if you have read the manifesto, there are a lot of things it says, but one thing that catches attention is it says people over processes, right, quote unquote. What's interesting about it is that no matter the process that you have implemented in your organization, you'd still be successful or unsuccessful depending on the kind of people you have, right? You may have no processes implemented, but you still could be successful if you have a set of motivated people working towards one goal, right? So why do we still need some sort of a process to drive it or the set of tools alongside it? One reason being, as an enterprise, in your aligning your IT goals, it's just not a bunch of developers sitting and writing code every time, right? There's so many things involved around it. There is project metrics, there is release planning, there is business analysis, requirements analysis, and the complexities become multifold if you're working in an environment which is geographically dispersed, for example, the offshore-onshore component, right? So if you are in geographically dispersed location, communication is a challenge, right? So some of these scenarios, you'd like your businesses to be aligned, or you'd like your software delivery process to be aligned to your business goals, and that is nothing but your application lifecycle management, right? One goal TFS was set up for is to unify your application lifecycle management processes in place, right? How many of you are using TFS today? Okay, quite a number. TFS 2010, how many of you are in TFS 2010? Okay, so a lot of you are in TFS 2005? Okay. So, how many of you think TFS is more than just source control? Can I get something, like what do you think, what else can it do for you?
You can complete the entire software development cycle using TFS.
Any specific example that you might have?
You have
like for us, for development process, we are using complete all the tracking tools like bug tracking, everything, like product backlog items, nothing but our use cases. So everything, all the tracking can happen through TFS.
Right.
Complete process perspective and testing perspective. So each phase of life cycle has some attached to TFS.
Right.
Some activity.
Cool, thanks a lot. So that was one of the goals, right? Traditionally, what happened before TFS is that there were process needs, of course, right? But there was not one single tool that you could have used that can unify that ecosystem, right? You'd probably use VSS for source control, and then maybe like Bugzilla for bug tracking, and then some other tool for work items management. Some project managers would just do Excel for that matter, right, to do project management. One goal that TFS was set up from the very beginning, and if you might be very familiar with this picture, it has been used time and again in the Microsoft showcases. It's in place since the beginning TFS was envisioned, right? One goal that TFS was brought in is to unify all that experience into one ecosystem. If you are a developer today, you are comfortable with Visual Studio, you do not have to step outside your comfort zone in what you do today using Visual Studio, right? The idea is that you should be able to do version control, builds, releases, work item management from within Visual Studio itself. If you are a project manager and you're very comfortable with Excel, right, you don't have to step outside that environment. You could still do project management using Excel and then sync it up with Team Foundation Server. So Team Foundation Server acts as a platform and unifies everything starting from the development editions or the different flavors of Visual Studio that you have today. It kind of unifies the experience that you have with Office. It does project management, work item tracking, version control, reporting, build and release, right? So your overall application lifecycle development experience has been unified. That has been the goal. Was Microsoft successful? Yes, of course, for all the versions. But something is pretty cool what you have today in TFS 11, right? So we're just going to switch to the demo. I think that's all about it in the slides. We're just going to see some of the demos. To start with, let's find out what's new for project managers, right? Or Scrum Masters, if you're doing Agile Scrum, if you would be familiar with the term called Scrum Masters. They do a lot of this stuff on their day-to-day goals, right? So let's see how your experience is enhanced as an engagement manager on a particular project, if you're playing the role of a Scrum Master, how you can leverage TFS today, right? So let me switch to my demo. The only problem I think is with the resolution. I'm going to log in. The virtual machine that I'm using for my demo is available for download from Keller's blog. I'm going to share the link at the end of the presentation so you can all download the virtual machine and perform the same actions that I'm doing today, right? So Julia is my project manager. She's of course playing multiple roles here, but for now she's my project manager, and I'm going to use her to demo some of the project management stuff that is there. So let me just log in. Yeah, let me adjust the resolution. It gets worse. Let's see if I can do a full screen. No. So let me open something called as the Tfs Web Access Portal. Now, if you had been using TFS, you would know that you don't necessarily have to use certain features of TFS only through Visual Studio, right? You have the Web Access Portal, which was very limiting in some senses. It gave you a flavor of SharePoint. You could do certain things like adding bugs, doing some sort of work item management on top of TFS. But nothing like this experience, what I'm going to just demonstrate now. So if you can see this, the whole dashboard thing has gone up a notch, right? You have an immersive experience today in terms of the team favorites, and by just one look, you can get an overall status of your project. One thing that TFS 11 is going to do different from what it used to do in the previous versions is that it now, in addition to the concepts of a project, it also has a concept of a team, right? Earlier, if you recall from your previous experiences, you created a team project and then you allocated some members to that particular project, and that's it. You couldn't do isolation. In a very realistic environment, when you are doing enterprise scale development, it's very natural that multiple teams are working on a particular project in different modules, right? There was no intuitive way in the previous versions of TFS that you could do that in a very understandable fashion. You had to do areas, iterations, all that sort of things were manual, and project managers had to go through all that pain in creating areas, iterations, etc., to isolate some of the work and distinguish between different teams. That is core to TFS today. So what you're looking at now is if you look at this top right-hand corner, Fabric and Fiber is the project, and Fabric and Fiber web team is the team that is working on that particular project, right? The matrices that you see here is telling you the matrices for that particular team, right? If you wanted to see the overall matrices, a roll-up for your team project, you could actually flip the view. From here, you could say, I just want to get the matrices for the entire project. It would roll up the matrices for you in a very immersive fashion. You can see the numbers right down there, and you can find out what is the statistics of your current project, what state is it in. So a few things the dashboard shows. Another thing I would talk about, if you see that sprint section, it tells you that right now you are in sprint 3. You're familiar with sprints, right? All of you? Right. So if this process guidance is based on the Agile Scrum template in TFS, based on the Agile methodology you are planning to use, there are different flavors of the templates that are available to you. The one that I am using is based out of Agile Scrum. You could create your own template, your own process guidance, customized to your needs, but then there are certain default templates that are available that you can go ahead and use right out of the box. So it tells you that you are in sprint 3, and it kind of gives you a capacity matrix, right? How, are you overburning the team? Are you over allocated, right? But you see that the marker is green. You have a total of 42 hours allocated for that particular sprint, or 42 hours available for that particular sprint, and you are only 39 hours allocated. So you are not over capacity. You are well within your comfort zone. The teams are well within their goals of meeting their deadlines, right? One thing that TFS does automatically is it identifies the sprint you are in based on the current date. So in this VM, the current date is set to February 2nd, and that is the time period that falls between that sprint cycle, February 6th to February 17th, and that's how it automatically puts you in sprint 3, right? So you don't have to do anything for that. You just have to define the sprints, define the durations of the sprint, and you would automatically, TFS would automatically put you in the current sprint that you are, right? So no overhead management on top of what you do in regular. Another thing is very interesting is you get snippet reports in every page in TFS. What that snippet report does, it gives you a peek view of a summarized information, right? For example, you get a snippet burn down. All of you are familiar with burn down? Right? So it kind of tracks the work that is left to be complete. In this particular case, you get a small burn down snippet view, just gives you an overview of how the burn down actually looks like, and then you can click on it, and it expands into a bigger chart if you want to do a detailed analysis. So it kind of tells you that you are most likely to not meet your goals in this sprint because your burn down is going up. But then today's tasks are not yet complete, so you expect some more closures to happen end of the day. That's when the burn down will come down, right? So that's how project managers would like to track some of the progress in the project. Okay, so the team favorites are again customizable. You can design the dashboard for yourself, the view that you want, right? For example, I would want, if I go to this work tab, I go to work items, and under the shared queries, I would like this. What happened? Wow. All bugs to be visible in my dashboard, right? So what I can do is click this, and you can say add to team favorites, right? There are two options, add to my favorites and team favorites. If you add them to my favorites, the moment you change the dashboard view to your project team, that will get customized based on the user you are logged in, right? But you also have the option to add something to the team favorites, meaning that it would be visible to all the team members, and that's added globally in the project dashboard, and it would be visible to all the team members in the project. So if I just say add to team members favorite, you can now see that all bugs are now listed part of the team favorites. Now if I go back home, you'll notice that the all bugs matrix now appears here, right? So this way you can customize the view that you're most comfortable with and work with it, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. The first thing that you'd probably do when you kickstart a project is you sit with the business analyst, or you sit with the product owner, and then you get a list of items that they think are most important or valuable to them, and you create line items out of it that kind of describes what that particular task is, and you create something called as a product backlog. Sprint backlog, product backlog. Okay, yeah. So you create something called as the product backlog, which is a global list of things that you want done at the end of a release, right? So you have release plans set that end of this particular month, I want this particular set of items done, right? You may not have extracted those items, and you may not have started working, but you have actually started capturing those items, right? So that kind of defines your product backlog. Few things that you do part of your product backlog is you kind of prioritize them, right? You work with the product owner to tell that this is my priority number 1, that is my priority number 2, and I want them to be done in that particular fashion. So when you're actually doing your sprint planning, which is your iteration, right? You pick items from the product backlog in the order of priority they're mentioned there, and you start attacking them. You start breaking them down into particular tasks. That's when you create your iteration backlog or the sprint backlog, right? The things that you're going to work in the current sprint, right, or the current deliverable week. So a nice thing about this is earlier, if you had to change priorities, it was not very easy, right, from project manager standpoint. Of course, you work with the product owner and they keep changing. They keep changing their mind all the time. End of this sprint, something was priority. The new sprint starting, they got feedback from the previous deliverable. Their priorities changed, right? So one thing that is very nice about here is I'm going to add a particular task, right? Say end users should be able to see weather information in the portal, right? And I go ahead and add this item. Now, by default, you'd notice that it gets added at the top, right? It depends on the selection, your mouse selection. If I had put my mouse cursor here and the 4th item, it would just get added on top of it, right? So wherever you are selected in that particular row, it would just get added on top of it, right? A very nice thing that you can do here is you can drag and drop, reorder it, and change the priorities. The priorities are automatically adjusted. Now say it's priority number 4 there, right? So you can do all sorts of manipulations there. You can make it the highest priority item if you wanted it to. Another thing is whenever you add something, the state is new. So if I just double click, you'll notice that the state is new. I can go ahead and assign it to a particular person, right? Or a Scrum Master. You could have different Scrum Master depending on the teams that are working on, right? I could assign it to a particular Scrum Master so that it figures in his list of to-do items. And then he makes sure that that particular item is delivered to the team when they start doing the sprint planning, right? So they just pick those items. So I can assign it to, say, Brian, or so let me assign it to Julia. And what I want to do is put an effort against the particular story. Can somebody tell me what the effort is going to be? Or how do you measure an effort? Sorry? Yeah, I heard planning poker somewhere, so I'm guessing you're right. That Scrum stays away is doing effort estimation right up front, right? Telling the clients that, you know, this particular item is going to take X hours worth of work. Very difficult to get that idea in place the first time. You should let your team work it out, right? You can get a feel that, okay, the complexity of this particular story is high or low, so it might take a ballpark certain hours, but you stay away from putting an actual estimate against the story till that is made part of the sprint planning process, right? That's an ideology you should relate to. That gives you a weighted estimation, a relative measure, right? So whenever you do effort estimation on stories, it's always a relative measure. You could use t-shirt sizing to measure. You could use any number that you can relate to that relatively tells you how complex one story is in relation to other, right? You always do relative estimation. Very common thing to do is a Fibonacci series because the gap increases as you move up the numbers. So you often do Fibonacci series when you're doing effort estimation, right? It helps you in velocity tracking as well. City I have a relative number in mind. I'm just going to put that number against it, right? So I'm going to give a relative number of, say, 8. And I'm going to save it. Save and close. Oops. Did I? Oh, I forgot to change the state. So I have said that this is approved. Now you can see that, the story has been approved by the client. It has got a relative effort estimation. Now this story is ready to be worked out in a particular sprint, right? So what I'm going to do now is drag this story, drop into my sprint. Cool, isn't it? If you're familiar with the way you used to work before in TFS, open 10 different windows, link one work item to another work item, build a hierarchy of relationships, and then ultimately forget where you started from and where you ended up, right? Where is your story? It's lost. Rebuild your query, find out where your story is, and then, just find out where your story has gone. So the moment I dragged and dropped it there, you would notice that my iteration path changed to sprint 3. What that means is that now this story has been picked up by the team for the estimation purposes, and they're going to work on this particular story this sprint, right? I'm not seeing any concerns, though. You should be concerned, you should be alarmed if you see this kind of thing happening, right? Yeah, I'm already in a sprint, right? And I'm saying that add this story up, right? Although, as I said in the beginning, Agile Scrum is not that watertight, but it doesn't mean that you do whatever you like, right? You cannot break the rhythm of a team, right? You cannot have stories moving in and out of a particular sprint while the sprint is running. You'd fail that team, you'd fail that particular sprint, right? Although there are some exception scenarios, at times there might be a situation that a story gets cancelled, right? Or there is a scenario where there are not enough requirements to proceed with a particular story. That is one particular scenario where a product owner may go back and tell you that, okay, drop this particular story from this sprint as you don't have enough requirements to work on that, pick this story instead, right? That is probably the only exception scenario where you can actually do this. Otherwise, it's a complete no-no, right? So for the purpose of my demo, I'm just going to assign it to the current sprint. Now, you go back, click on the current sprint, and notice that the story is now part of your iteration, that is your sprint 3. What you can do is go ahead as you are playing that planning poker, right? And then you are breaking down tasks and developers are coming together and estimating them, right? Right now it's the real effort estimation, the number of hours that you have to assign. You can break this particular story into tasks. So what I'm going to do now is just click on this plus, enter a particular task, get data feeds for, from the weather channel, right? Assign it to my default player, Julia. State is sudo, and what I'm going to assign is the remaining work, that is the number of hours I need to complete this particular story. Maybe I would need just say 10 hours, which is crazy. And I'm going to save and close. Did you notice something that happened in the color coding? Did you notice something that changed in the color code? It changed from green to, I don't know, that's probably pink, not very fancy about pink stuff, but then it changed that color to pink. And the reason it changed is because now you see that you are over capacity, right? If you scroll down, you see that Julia only has 6 hours available for this particular sprint, but she has been allocated 16 hours. She is over capacity, right? If you want to work Julia dead, kill her till she dies working on that particular task, you could go ahead on this capacity tab, change her capacity, increase her capacity, don't give her any days off. She has to work Saturdays and Sundays, and increase her capacity for that for those days that she's working on. Or if you are a good Scrum Master and you love your team, you'd probably say that, no, this is not a successful path that we want to drive. I'm going to pick a particular story out of this sprint and then allocate it to some other sprint. This is not feasible for making the sprint successful. So I'm just going to pick that particular story out. You go ahead, fight with the client, tell him that there is no way we can do it in this particular sprint, right? So if you have to do that, go back to your contents, drag that particular story along with this task, and assign it to sprint 4. All drag and drop, right? No opening windows, linking items, assigning one item to the other. Now you see Julia is very happy. She's back to her 7-hour allocation. You are back to the capacity that you determined for this particular sprint. Everything is hunky-dory, right? So nice stuff down here. Another thing that you could do is, again, you have, as I said, there are reporting snippets everywhere, right? You can track the burn down from your dashboard. You can track the burn down from this particular page. You can track your capacity from all the graphs that are listed on the right-hand side, right? So you, at different levels, you are measuring the progress. They are rolled up to the summary information, but then they are again broken down to each level as you move, right? Okay. Another thing that you could do here is, if you go back to the Home tab and change this to the particular team, sorry, I think it's in the Work tab, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Can somebody tell me what is the velocity? Okay. Okay. Right. So what happens when you start a project, right? Your 5 fingers are not same, right? Different team members become part of the project. Some may not have similar dynamics. Some people may not have the same level of capacity to deliver a particular task, right? It varies all across. But the idea is that over a period of time, your team will get better aligned to each other's thoughts. They will get better aligned to the goals of the project, and you will have consistent deliveries, right? So what happens is that you kind of measure your velocity. The velocity is probably some sort of measure that you have put in place. Generally, if you are using a Fibonacci series, it's the sum of the story points that you have accomplished in a particular sprint, right? So if you notice here, in sprint 1, I have accomplished 35 story points. In sprint 2, I have accomplished 42 story points. In sprint 3, I have so far accomplished 18 story points, 23 story points are pending. This graph is not exponential, please keep in mind. It doesn't mean that if a team is successful with a particular story point, you try and attempt the next feasible number, right? It doesn't work that way. You'd fail at some point in time, right? So it has to be linear at some point in time. You get to a number. If you're consistently delivering that number and the team is comfortable doing that particular number, you stick to it, right? Do not force them to do more or, achieve more. And, it's not like linearly you could shoot 200 points at some point in time. That's not feasible at all. So you can do velocity tracking through this particular graph as well. Another thing that you can do is you can turn on forecasting. So you could actually predict how many story points that you can do in future sprints. So if you turn on the predictive forecasting, what you could do is you can see that based on the velocity, what is your progress on the sprints, and you can change this velocity number. Say I'm going to change it to 35, and you see that the stories get adjusted over the sprints, and you can see how much you can achieve over a period of time, right? Okay, so that's about the velocity. I think we're running a little short, so I'm going to rush the next thing a little bit. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is something we do on a very regular basis. So if you are following Scrum religiously, right, you do something called as a stand-up. Can somebody tell me what is a stand-up? What you should do and shouldn't do in a stand-up? Absolutely. Right, so you're all familiar with the stand-up thingy, right? Now, Scrum suggests that your team be local, all your team members be sitting next to each other. You should have a stand-up board where you can physically see tasks moving from one state to another, starting from yet to be completed, like haven't been picked up yet, to in progress, to done, right? That gives you a physical feeling in your mind that you are progressing, right? And it helps the overall progress of the project, right? It becomes complicated if you have geographically dispersed teams, right? Again, back to the offshore-onshore model. You cannot really do stand-ups, a team standing up here and then another team standing virtually across the ocean, right, and doing communication with them. It's funny the way we do it is sometimes we say, instead of saying what we did yesterday, we say what we did today, what we're going to do tomorrow. The cycle changes, it flips, right? So in TFS 11, you do not have to have a physical board. They have presented you something called as a virtual board. So if during your stand-up, you can use a monitor to pull up this virtual task board, put it in the monitor, and talk about things, you know, that you're going to do today or you're going to do or you've actually completed, right? Very nice thing. This is a virtual task board that is available to you now. During your stand-ups, you can pull this up and then actually see the progress, right? To actually move tasks from one stage to another, you can, again, back to drag and drop. So I've just completed one particular task. You can have a backlog item view. You can have a team member view by team member who is working on what particular task. You can drag drop. You can, you know, change the estimate during your discussions. You can do all sorts of things with the task board. A very virtual way of, you know, collaborating with your team members. Very nice thing if you're, again, geographically dispersed, you're working in a very collaborative environment. Okay, so I think we talked a lot about project managers. Now let me switch back to my slide. So these are some of the things we talked about, and I have summarized this for you, so when you go back and try to take a look at the session or just visit the recording, you should be able to relate to what we just discussed. So there's a summarized notes of what are the things that are available to you from a project management standpoint. Another very big thing that is important is requirements management, right? Often as business analysts, you get into conversations with developers, right? You give a requirement the developers are not very happy about, they do not understand the thing. You engage in a lot of email communication. You talk to them, you exchange emails, and then, you know, you never know when the requirements are frozen. So a lot of communication that happens. A very nice tool that Microsoft has introduced in TFS 11 is called as PowerPoint Storyboarding. So now, okay, I'm in full screen. If you go to Start, All Programs, Visual Studio 11, you notice that there is something called as PowerPoint Storyboarding. Now, a PowerPoint Storyboarding is an add-in that is available to, you can download it separately. You don't have to have TFS. Install it in your PowerPoint. It comes with a set of shapes and templates. So if I just open that, so you notice that it comes with a set of shapes, backgrounds, a lot of artifacts that can help you easily create storyboards, right? And say once you have created a storyboard, I have done it actually already for one of the projects, and then once you have created a storyboard, let me say change the layout for this particular storyboard. Okay, I don't see the master thing. So let me just drag and drop some item. So you can, you know, use drag and drop pre-existing shapes to build your storyboard. Once you are done, what you can do is click on this, save it. Click on this item called as storyboard links. Oh, so I have to save it to SharePoint, which I already did. So let me go to TFS project portal. So you cannot have the storyboarding information connected to TFS if you have saved it locally. So you have to save it in the project portal or some shared location from where your team can access it, right? So I've already done that. Hopefully it opens up quickly. Okay, so while it does, I'll talk about another thing. Another interesting tool that is part of requirements management itself is something called as the feedback client. Now, the business analyst has done his job. He has given you the requirements. You don't understand the requirements. You have some feedback, right? What you can do is you can use this feedback client. So let me select the project. You can use this feedback client to provide feedback on the stories or anything that you are not very clear about, and then associate that particular feedback with a particular story or a particular task item. Both things are possible. So how do you capture feedback? The feedback manager comes with a wizard. The first thing that you do is start capturing the feedback. So you can capture feedback in terms of voice. So you can talk about something that you're not very clear about. In that particular comments area, you can type text, or you can actually go ahead and capture screenshots. So I would just capture screenshots of this particular PPT here. Probably I don't understand, and you notice that it got automatically posted there, right? So you can use this feedback manager to capture all sorts of feedback, and then rate or review your particular feedback if you wanted to, and then submit and close. So the moment you submit your feedback, it will go, and in your TFS project portal, if you go to work, if you go to work items, you notice that there is something called as assigned to me. All the feedbacks that you capture are part of assigned to me and under the category voluntary feedback. The reason it's called voluntary feedback is because you did it on intention. If you have solicited feedback from somebody, like I'm a business analyst, I can go ahead and solicit feedback from somebody as well. To do that, what I would do is go to home and say request feedback. If that is the case, you can directly assign that particular feedback to a work item. But if not, all your feedbacks are available as part of the capture feedback there, and what you can do is then you can move it and assign it to different work items as you need them fit, right? So you can capture all sorts of feedbacks on stories and do your requirements analysis, right? We're out of time, so one last thing that I wanted to cover here quickly was in terms of testing, which is very similar to what you saw in the way the feedbacks are captured. Testers generally do exploratory testing. They like to use not just follow a particular path, always create test plan, create test cases, and then create a particular bug or anything. You could do exploratory testing using the new test client that is available here. I'm not going to demo it anymore. You can go ahead and explore part of this virtual machine that is downloadable. So you can explore what new things are available to you in terms of the test manager, right? All right, I think that was a rapid action session. I kind of concluded it, but I'd stand in here for any sort of questions that you might have, and then we can address those. No? All right, cool. Thanks a lot for attending this session. Hopefully you got something to explore further. So go back, download. If you want to take a reference of where you can download this virtual machine from, here is the link. If you want to take notes about this, practice some of the scenarios that I just described.